Everyone knows Napoleon lost in Russia. The retreat from Moscow, 600,000 men marching into winter hell, but almost nobody talks about the moment it all went wrong. Not the burning city, not the snow. One battle, one man. One decision that broke the greatest army Europe had ever seen. June 18th, or 1812, the Grande Armée crosses the Niemen River. Napoleon commands 614,000 soldiers from across his empire. French, German, Polish, Italian. The largest invasion force in history. His target: destroy the Russian armies, force Tsar Alexander to negotiate, control Europe from Lisbon to St. Petersburg. By September, he's taken Smolensk, scattered Russian forces, marched 400 miles into enemy territory. Moscow sits empty ahead. Victory feels certain. Then comes General Kutuzov. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Clausewitz's campaign analysis and Russian military archives. Now back to the story. August 20th, 1812. Tsar Alexander names Mikhail Illarionovich Kutuzov, commander-in-chief of all Russian forces. The man is 67 years old, half blind from a Turkish bullet that took his right eye at Alushta 29 years earlier. Fat, slow. Speaks French better than most of Napoleon's marshals. The court nobles hate him. They want aggression, glory, decisive battles. Kutuzov wants something else entirely. He studies the numbers. Napoleon started with 614,000 men. Disease, desertion, and garrison duty have cost him 200,000. The Grande Armée now counts 400,000 effective soldiers. Still massive, still lethal, but no longer infinite. Kutuzov knows the math of Russian space. From the Niemen to Moscow, 450 miles. Every mile Napoleon advances stretches his supply lines thinner. Every mile costs horses, wagons, ammunition reserves. Every mile pulls him deeper into a country that can swallow armies whole. The old general has read his Vegetius, his Maurice de Saxe. He understands that destroying an enemy doesn't always require destroying his soldiers. Sometimes you destroy his capacity to fight. September 1st, 1812. Russian forces pull back from Smolensk. Napoleon expects another retreat. Instead, Kutuzov chooses ground 75 miles west of Moscow. A village called Borodino. Rolling hills, dense woods, narrow front that negates Napoleon's numerical advantage. Here, Kutuzov will make his stand, not to win, to bleed. September 6th. Dawn breaks cold over Borodino Field. Napoleon deploys 130,000 men, 587 guns. Kutuzov commands 120,000 Russians, 624 artillery pieces. The French attack begins at 6 in the morning. Marshal Davout's First Corps hits the Russian left flank. Prince Bagration's Second Army holds, barely. The Shevardino redoubt falls to a French assault. Russian infantry counterattacks, fails. French cavalry charges Russian squares, breaks, reforms, charges again. By noon, the killing reaches industrial scale. French artillery pounds Russian positions, Russian guns answer, round-shot tears through packed formations, grape-shot shreds advancing columns. Marshal Ney's Third Corps takes the Great Redoubt, the key Russian position on their center left, holds it for 20 minutes. Russian Guard cavalry charges, retakes the position. French infantry storms forward again. The redoubt changes hands 4 times in 2 hours. 3 o'clock, Prince Bagration, commanding the Russian left wing, takes grapeshot in the leg, arterial wound. He bleeds out on the field. His Second Army wavers but holds position. French casualties mount beyond sustainable levels. Davout's First Corps loses 8,000 men. Ney's Third Corps bleeds out 12,000 soldiers. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's reserve, remains intact, but shocked by the slaughter. Here's what Kutuzov understood that Napoleon missed. Winning Borodino didn't matter. Surviving it did. French losses, 28,000 dead and wounded. Russian losses, 44,000 dead and wounded. By raw numbers, Napoleon won. But those 28,000 Frenchmen were irreplaceable. 450 miles from home base, no reinforcements coming, no medical supplies adequate for the carnage, no replacement officers for decimated battalions. The mathematics of replacement tell the real story. Napoleon's corps commanders reported severe officer shortages within days of Borodino. Marshal Davout's First Corps lost 63% of its company-grade officers, dead or too wounded to command. Ney's Third Corps fared worse, 71% officer casualties. Battalion commanders killed, captains bleeding out in field hospitals, lieutenants abandoned on the battlefield. You can't run an army without officers. You can't maintain discipline without leadership. French medical records from Borodino paint a grim picture. Surgeon Dominique Jean Larry. Napoleon's chief medical officer documented 12,000 wounded requiring immediate amputation or advanced surgery. His field hospitals had supplies for maybe 3,000 procedures. No anesthesia beyond rum and leather straps, no antiseptic beyond boiling water. Infection killed more French soldiers than Russian bullets. Kutuzov's 44,000 Russians could be replaced. From Moscow's population, from Kaluga's militias, from conscription levies across the empire, Russian officer casualties ran lower, 38% compared to French 67% losses. The Russian command structure remained intact. Fresh regiments marched toward Moscow from St. Petersburg, Kiev, Arkhangelsk. Every Russian casualty brought fresh soldiers one day closer to the front. Every French casualty brought Napoleon one soldier closer to disaster. September 7th, Napoleon occupies Borodino battlefield, counts his victory. Kutuzov pulls back toward Moscow. The French pursue, expecting Russian collapse. Instead, they find systematic withdrawal. Bridges burned, wells poisoned, grain stores evacuated, food requisitions fail, horse fodder disappears. Local populations flee with their livestock. The Grande Armée advances through empty countryside, consuming its own supply reserves. September 14th, Napoleon enters Moscow. The city stands deserted. 800,000 inhabitants vanished. Warehouses stripped bare. Granaries empty. That night, fires break out across the city. Not random blazes. Coordinated arson ordered by Moscow's governor, Count Rostopchin. By morning, 3/4 of Moscow burns. Napoleon's winter quarters turn to ash and rubble. His supply base becomes a wasteland. The fires consumed more than buildings. French quartermasters had counted on capturing Moscow's winter supplies. Grain stores to feed 100,000 men for 4 months, hay reserves for 20,000 horses, wool clothing stockpiled in merchant warehouses, all smoke. Napoleon's logistics officers calculated they needed 800 tons of flour per day to maintain the army. Moscow's burned granaries held 0 tons. The math became simple. No food equals no army. But Kutuzov understood something deeper about Napoleon's psychology. The French emperor had built his entire reputation on quick victories, decisive battles, negotiated peace within months. Every previous campaign followed this pattern. Austerlitz, 1 battle. Austrian surrender. Jena-Auerstedt, 1 battle. Prussian collapse. Wagram, 1 battle. Austrian terms, Napoleon expected the same script in Russia. Win major battle, occupy capital, force negotiations. Kutuzov refused to follow the script. The old general positioned his remaining forces south of Moscow, near Kaluga, not retreating towards St. Petersburg like Napoleon expected, not conceding defeat, simply waiting. Russian agents spread throughout the occupied city, reporting French movements, counting enemy strength, identifying weakness. Kutuzov learned that Napoleon's scouts found no Russian peace emissaries approaching Moscow. No white flags, no negotiation requests, just silence. September 29th. Napoleon sends General Lauriston to Kutuzov's headquarters with peace overtures. Standard diplomatic protocol. Victorious army offers terms to defeated enemy. Kutuzov receives Lauriston politely, serves tea, discusses the weather, refuses all negotiations. The campaign is just beginning, he tells the French envoy. Words that sent ice through Napoleon's confidence. October 6th. Napoleon realizes his position has become impossible. Winter approaches. No peace negotiations, no supply base, no secure retreat route. Russian forces growing stronger while French strength ebbs daily. Disease kills more French soldiers than combat ever did. Typhus spreads through crowded billets. Dysentery weakens entire battalions. Hunger reduces proud guardsmen to foraging like animals. October 19th, Napoleon begins retreat from Moscow. Winter hasn't arrived yet, but his position has become untenable. No food reserves, no adequate shelter, no secure supply line stretching back to Smolensk. The Grande Armée starts its withdrawal with 100,000 effective soldiers. Kutuzov follows at distance, never offering decisive battle. Instead, he launches constant harassment. Cossack raids on supply columns, partisan attacks on isolated detachments, guerrilla warfare that bleeds the French army by degrees. Kutuzov's harassment campaign followed precise calculations. Cossack units of 50 to 200 riders struck French supply convoys, then melted back into the countryside. Each attack cost Napoleon irreplaceable resources: ammunition wagons, medical supplies, food reserves. French forces couldn't pursue effectively without weakening the main army. They couldn't ignore the attacks without starving. The partisan war intensified as French desperation grew. Russian peasants, initially neutral or even hostile to their own government, turned savage against the invaders. French foraging parties ventured out for food, never returned. Bodies found weeks later, stripped, mutilated, left as warnings. local populations practiced scorched earth without orders, burned their own villages rather than feed French soldiers. November 3rd, first major engagement of the retreat, Battle of Vyazma. French rearguard under Marshal Davout fights Russian forces commanded by General Miloradovich. 3 hours of combat. French lose 4,000 soldiers, 6 artillery pieces, critical time. More importantly, they lose momentum. The retreat becomes a crawl. Kutuzov's parallel march keeps pace, always threatening, never quite engaging. Weather reports from French officers paint the deteriorating situation. November 5th, temperatures drop to -5 Celsius. November 8th, -12. November 11th, -15. French soldiers still wear summer campaign uniforms. Many left proper winter gear in supply depots now hundreds of miles behind enemy lines. Frostbite cases multiply daily. November 9th, first snowfalls, temperatures drop to -10 Celsius. French soldiers lack adequate winter clothing. Many marched into Russia wearing summer uniforms, expecting quick victory and early return home. Frostbite cripples thousands, dysentery kills more, typhus spreads through packed ranks, dead horses litter the retreat route. Artillery pieces abandoned when teams die. Wagons burned for fuel. November the 26th through 28th, crossing at Berezina River. Napoleon faces potential annihilation. Russian armies converge from 3 directions. Admiral Chichagov blocks the western bank with 34,000 soldiers. General Wittgenstein approaches from the north with 30,000 men. Kutuzov pursues from the east with 80,000 troops. Napoleon commands 27,000 effective soldiers and 40,000 stragglers, wounded, and camp followers. The Berezina crossing became the Grande Armée's final agony. French engineers worked in water temperatures of -20 Celsius. Many died of hypothermia while building the bridges. Their bodies floated downstream, past the crossing points where desperate civilians waited. Russian artillery, positioned on high ground, could target both bridges simultaneously. Every shell created panic among packed refugees. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes from hell, wounded soldiers thrown from bridges to make room for the healthy, women and children crushed underfoot by fleeing men, horses pushed into the river, drowning along with their riders. Count Philippe de Ségur, Napoleon's aide-de-camp, wrote, "The stronger pushed the weaker into the deadly waters. The ice carried away the living and the dead." French engineers built 2 bridges across the Berezina in sub-zero temperatures. Soldiers worked in icy water, many dying of exposure during construction. The crossing became a nightmare. Panic spreads through civilian refugees. People push, fall, drown in the river. Russian artillery pounds the crossing points. Bodies pile up on both riverbanks. Of the 67,000 people who attempted the crossing, only 20,000 reached safety. But the numbers tell a more complex story. Napoleon's rearguard action at Berezina actually succeeded tactically. Marshal Victor's 9th Corps held off Wittgenstein's advance. Marshal Parthenot's division, caught isolated, fought to destruction, but bought crucial time. French artillery, firing over open sights, kept Russian forces at distance long enough for the bridges to function. The real disaster came from logistics collapse. French Medical Corps recorded 8,000 cases of severe frostbite during the 3-day crossing. Field hospitals had no facilities for treating exposure injuries. Amputations performed with carpenter's saws, patients dying faster than surgeons could work, funeral pyres burned constantly, competing with campfires for scarce fuel. December 5th, temperature reaches -37 Celsius, the coldest measurement recorded by French meteorologists in the entire campaign. At this temperature, musket mechanisms freeze solid. Artillery pieces crack from thermal stress. Horse urine freezes before hitting the ground. Soldiers' breath creates ice clouds that obscure vision. The Grande Armée becomes a column of walking dead. December 14th, Napoleon abandons his army at Smorgon, racing back to Paris to raise fresh forces. By this point, the Grande Armée has ceased to exist as fighting force. Marshal Ney commands the rear guard, 900 soldiers, from 614,000. The Emperor's departure marked the final collapse of French morale. Officers began deserting their units. Entire regiments dissolved into bands of desperate looters. General Caulaincourt, accompanying Napoleon on the sleigh ride to Paris, recorded conversations during the journey. The Emperor admitted his tactical errors, blamed subordinates, planned new armies, never acknowledged Kutuzov's strategic genius. December 23rd, Marshal Ney's rearguard reaches Königsberg. His force now numbers 400 men. These survivors represent the last organized French unit east of the Niemen River. Ney himself walks like his soldiers, his marshal's uniform indistinguishable from common infantry rags. The bravest of the brave leads 400 ghosts from an army of 600,000. Russian casualty reports from the pursuit tell a different story. Kutuzov's forces suffered minimal losses during the French retreat. Weather killed more Russians than combat, but their losses remained sustainable. Local knowledge helped. Russian soldiers knew how to layer clothing, where to find shelter, which foods prevented scurvy. They fought in their homeland, supplied from intact depots, reinforced by fresh conscripts. Kutuzov's strategic patience extended beyond mere battlefield tactics. He understood the political dimensions of victory. Too aggressive a pursuit might rally French resistance. Better to let Napoleon's army destroy itself through exposure, hunger, disease. Let Europe see French invincibility crumble without Russian atrocities to complicate the narrative. The old general also grasped the economic warfare aspects that escaped Napoleon's attention. Each French horse that died in Russia represented 12 months of training, 60 francs of purchase cost to eat and ongoing feed expenses, French artillery abandoned on retreat roads, 2 years of foundry work per cannon, specialized gunpowder supplies, trained crews irreplaceable in short term. French military engineers calculated the total material losses at 47 million francs, more than twice the annual Russian state budget. Kutuzov's strategy worked perfectly, not through brilliant tactical maneuvers or decisive battlefield victories, through patience, calculation, and understanding of strategic mathematics. He traded space for time, casualties for exhaustion, short-term losses for long-term victory. He let Russia itself become his weapon, the distances, the weather, the hostile population, the endless capacity to absorb punishment and return stronger. The numbers prove his genius. French strength reports from key dates tell the story. June 24th, at Niemen Crossing, 614,000. September 7th after Borodino, 400,000. October 19th, leaving Moscow, Mowet, 100,000. December 14th at Smorgon, 27,000 effective soldiers. January 1st, 1813, fewer than 10,000 French soldiers remained east of the Oder River. Russian strength followed the opposite trajectory. August 20th, when Kutuzov assumed command, 120,000 regulars plus militia. October 1st, 140,000 as reinforcements arrived. December 1st, 160,000 including Cossack irregulars. January 1st, 1813, Batosinia, 180,000 Russian soldiers positioned to invade Germany. Kutuzov had grown stronger while Napoleon bled to death, but the real victory went deeper than numbers. Napoleon's aura of invincibility shattered permanently in Russian snows. European allies began reconsidering their positions. Prussia, forced into alliance with France, secretly negotiated with Russian diplomats. Austria, nominally French-aligned, refused to reinforce Napoleon's eastern front. The coalition that would eventually destroy Napoleon's empire began forming in the ashes of the Grande Armée. Kutuzov also understood the intelligence war that historians often overlook. Russian agents throughout Europe reported French troop movements, supply problems, diplomatic tensions. French counterintelligence, weakened by campaign losses, failed to penetrate Russian networks effectively. Information asymmetry became another weapon in Kutuzov's arsenal. He always knew more about French capabilities than Napoleon knew about Russian strength. The old general never lived to see complete victory. Kutuzov died at Bunzlau in April 1813, his body worn out by the campaign, but his methods had broken Napoleon's military power forever. The emperor would raise new armies, fight new campaigns. He would never again command forces capable of conquering continents. Modern military analysis confirms Kutuzov's strategic wisdom. Soviet-era studies of the 1812 campaign, using declassified Russian archives, reveal systematic planning behind apparent Russian retreats. Kutuzov's staff prepared detailed logistics calculations, weather assessments, population evacuation schedules. Nothing left to chance. Every withdrawal served strategic purpose. Western historians, limited by language barriers and political restrictions, initially misunderstood Russian strategy. They interpreted retreats as weakness, Borodino as tactical defeat, Moscow's abandonment as panic. Only access to Russian sources revealed Kutuzov's deliberate methodology. He fought a modern war of attrition using pre-industrial tools. Here's what the archives reveal about Kutuzov's real achievement. Buried in the Smolensk fortress grounds, archaeologists found mass graves containing French military equipment, uniform buttons, regimental insignia. Carbon dating confirms 1812 burials. Among the artifacts, a compass bearing Napoleon's personal cipher dropped during the retreat. The emperor who conquered Europe left his navigation tool in Russian soil, along with his army and his dreams of Eastern Empire. Cold metal, Russian earth, empire's end.